If I could tell you a story, if I could tell you a story kind of like Kirk and Ari did this past weekend. And I mean, we're talking about live it here, right? Living our faith. We should have stories to tell if we're living of our faith. If I could tell you a story, I'd tell you about the time that this friend of mine, he was a college friend. We'd been spending so much time together, all 4 years of college, and at the beginning of senior year, we were about to head off to camp for cross country to run, and just before we headed out, we were waiting around for the vans to leave, and we were just talking in the stands of the football stadium, and I'd tell you about how he came up to me. And we climbed up to the top of the stands. I remember exactly where we were. We were in the press studio, or the press box. And I tell you about the time that he looked at me with joy in his eyes. And he said over the summer he had chosen to become a Christian, a follower of Jesus. And I tell you about how that made me feel. If I could tell you a story, I'd tell you about what it feels like to baptize family members who have chosen to demonstrate their faith by being baptized, and what that feels like to be there and to baptize them, or to baptize people with tears in their eyes as they know that they're dedicating their life to Jesus. If I could tell you a story, I'd tell you about the thousands of times that I personally have felt convicted, come face to face with things that I've done that I know aren't right. And then I'd also tell you about how in those moments I ask for forgiveness from God, and I have this overwhelming sense of relief, this overwhelming sense of forgiveness, and how that changes everything. If I could tell you a story, I'd tell you about the students. Back when I was youth pastor here, the students, I had a front row seat of watching their faith develop and grow, where they realized their need for Jesus and how that shaped the trajectory of their life, and how some of them went on to be missionaries in countries not even here, all across the world, and others who are living their faith in the here and now in the most simple and beautiful ways. If I could tell you a story, I'd tell you about the funerals that I've officiated, where I'd gotten to know the people, and I'd gotten to know about their faith, and I'd seen it lived out, and I got to tell the families of their faith and how it had changed and shaped them, and how I knew with certainty that they were spending eternity with God in heaven. And I got to tell that story to a family that it gave peace to and joy to. If I could tell you a story, I'd tell you about how following Jesus has changed and shaped the way I live my marriage with my wife and my kids, and being a father and a husband, and how it's shaped a million different ways in the smallest little bits of how we treat each other and care for each other and love each other, and how it's still so hard, but at the same time, it is this guiding principle that has changed everything. If I could tell you a story, I'd try to help you picture and feel and hear and smell what it's like to be in this place where people are speaking a different language completely than I know, and yet they are gathered together, having less than any of us, having what seems like nothing compared to what we have, and yet they sing with such gratitude and joy, thanking God for all that He's given to them. And I would try to show you and help you understand and see and feel just how incredible it is to see God working in a people like that. If I could tell you a story, then I'd ask. If I could tell you those stories, I'd also ask you, don't you want to live it like that? Don't you want to live it in such a way where you have those stories? Following Jesus for me has changed a million small and big and gigantic decisions for how I live my life. It has shaped who I am. My life is filled with stories to prove the change that Jesus has made in my life. If I could tell you a story, I've told you some stories, I've got more to tell. Then I'd invite you into a story yourself. And I'd ask you, can you imagine your life with Jesus leading? And if you have, in fact, had Jesus leading your life, I'd ask, can you recount the ways that Jesus has changed the way you live and the difference that He's made? And I'd ask you today, can you choose to actually live for Jesus today and have that make a change in your life? Maybe you've forgotten what it's like to actually have that be your guiding principle. What would it be like to begin to do that today? And let me challenge you. Let me challenge you by saying this. If you want that, then make the choice. Make the choice to say a daily prayer like Mike talked about months ago. Pastor Mike talked about months ago where he said, if you want to be used by God, just say that simple prayer, God, use me today. You could pray, direct me today, Jesus. Maybe it's possible life could be filled with more stories. Maybe Jesus could make this change in your life. It'd be worth it, right? It'd be worth living it like that. Thanks for living it with me, and I look forward to seeing you next week.